I'd like to call a meeting of the Willits City Council to order for April 22nd. Can we all rise? Larry, would you lead us in the flag?
I will. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Roll call, please.
Yes.
Strong?
Yes.
Madrigal?
Here.
Orenstein?
Here.
Mayor Burton?
Here. I'm going to make a couple changes to our agenda this evening in light of some of the changes that have happened here in the last few days. I'm going to, after public communications, I'm going to move up council member reports and recommendations, which is a discussion on the herbicide use on the mitigation land. So we'll take that up in the first item under public matters, so a few people are here can deal with that and we can move on. I'm going to pull item B from the public matters, which is a discussion and possible approval of a franchise agreement with solid waste. We will not be having a discussion on that this evening. And then we're going to the minutes on several meetings of the March 28th and April 8th under the consent calendar are going to be pulled. So do we have any public communication this evening? Items not on the agenda? No action will be taken? Yes.
Good evening, Martin Milley, Cold Creek Compost. I was going to speak on item B, but I suppose I'll have a few words now. I just want the council to know that Cold Creek is ready, willing, and able to start recycling Willits' organic matters. We built a facility to do just that 20 years ago. And it seems like such a logical thing that everybody in this would be a winner. The waste hauler would make more money, his operations would be simpler, the city would be guaranteed compliance now and for future requirements from the state, and we'd be keeping the economy local, jobs, and keeping our resources here. And I don't know, maybe someone can answer it for me, but I just don't understand why it requires so much work and takes so long to bring something so logical about. And we thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else on the, yes?
Mike Sweeney, speaking as an individual. I think I could possibly speak to the point that the last speaker raised as to why this is so difficult to process. It is a difficult and very challenging process to do a franchise contract, particularly when you're dealing with a no-bid extension for an agreement that will bind your citizens for their garbage bills and for their diversion opportunities for 15 years, or it could be 25 years, depending on how Section 4 is written. So those are difficult choices. There are many specific difficult choices that you as the City Council are confronted with. And I think everyone should understand how hard it is and why this process has been so prolonged. One of the things that I submitted to your city manager and your ad hoc a week ago was a memo in which I tried to highlight some of the more pressing choices that I thought you may wish to consider as a City Council individually that might merit to be pulled out and voted up or down individually based on their own merits. That memo appears as Exhibit B in your agenda packet. Now, it's my understanding that this will come back to you at some future meeting, and I don't expect Exhibit B will be there anymore. But I hope that you will take to heart the fact that there are specific things that you may wish to highlight and approach individually. So I will recirculate in a different form that same memorandum for your consideration. So in conclusion, it's been a real privilege to offer such assistance as I have, and I wish you the best of luck in completing this in the near future in a satisfactory way for your citizens.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have any other public communications this evening? Second, third, and last call? Okay, we'll move on to public matters. I was just passed a note. I'm going to take up the first item on the discussion and direction regarding the city's sphere of influence. We do have the LAFCO director here, and I want to acknowledge it was a item on the agenda. We'll take up the other issue directly after that, but I don't want to, he's here for that purpose, and I don't want to delay that, so. Adrian, can you introduce this one to us, or?
Sure. Get back to it here. All right, well, we went through the municipal review, service review process over the last few months, and that was adopted by LAFCO in February. I actually put January in the agenda summary, but it was officially adopted in February. So now that that process is done, we need to turn our attention to the sphere of influence, which requires an application process that George will talk more about, the timeline associated with that and the various steps along, through that process. But there's been discussion over the years about various areas outside the city that should be considered in a sphere of influence discussion, and certainly at the top of the list would be the northern and southern interchanges of the bypass. In addition to that, there are out-of-city boundary service connections, mostly for water connections, but a few sewer connections as well. With regard to the water connections, those connections were inherited when the city purchased the water treatment plant back in the 80s, and there's just been no formal annexation of those connections. When we were putting together the history of this, we discovered that the city, to the best of our knowledge, has never adopted a formal sphere of influence. So rather than this being an update to an adopted one, we're simply looking to formalize a sphere of influence. And what you have in the packet is a map of the bypass project area, an excerpt from the recently adopted municipal service review that talks about the sphere of influence and what should be considered, and then an excerpt from our general plan that talks about some of our land use policies relative to this conversation. And then as distributed tonight is also a map of the bypass project area with the land uses for those northern and southern interchanges. So with that, I'd like to invite George Williamson up to the podium to address the council. He's the executive officer for LAFCO.
Good evening, George. Thanks for coming.
Well,
That doesn't actually amplify your voice, but
Oh,
it does connect to the TV.
record. Okay,
so.
thank you. I figured. I've never been accused of speaking softly, so that's good.
Appreciate
Well,
that.
thank you, members of the council, and I appreciate you preserving my item on the agenda. I do live out of the area. I do this on contract and have a drive ahead of me, so that is very much appreciated. And really tonight, we're just here on an informational item. And but I do want to acknowledge the work of your staff in assisting us with the municipal service review. Your city manager appeared several times at commission meetings, and once I think at least brought Public Works and Finance, but really contributed significantly to the municipal service review. It's a good service review. And your staff had a big part of it. I also want to acknowledge Councilmember Madrigal, who I've never seen miss a meeting and is a good contributor on the commission as well. So good efforts from the city in being a good LAFCO partner. So as Adrian mentioned to you, MSR is complete. Next step is the sphere of influence. And at the commission level, at the staff level, we will be looking particularly at those areas that are that you're currently serving, and whether those should be in the sphere. I've been doing this for about 9 months, so I'm fairly new, and we've came to the same conclusion that your staff has. We haven't been able to find a record of a sphere beyond your city boundary, but that's okay. You know, that's not that uncommon. A lot of spheres are same as district boundaries, and so we're going to be looking at that, and that's why we do these on a frequent cycle, is so that we can really look at potential growth areas. And I think your city manager set the stage well with putting the right information in front of you. General plan, we're going to be looking at some growth projections. We're going to be looking at some land uses and continuing to work with your staff to bring this sphere of influence forward. So, but there's two parts to it. There's what we will do as a commission, and that is looking at what areas you're serving and basic growth projections. That's part of the deal, that you contribute to the commission operation budget, and that's appreciated, and that's part of service you get in for that. But it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you as a city to look at other areas, and you know, the bypass interchanges are an area worth considering. No decisions, but getting the word out there, and I will commit to you and to the citizens here that, you know, we'll take a look at that. So to get that discussion started, I just took the county land uses that surround the north and south interchanges, and I just put them on a map so that you could see what kind of land uses. They're mostly resource land, some low-density residential, and so that's kind of a starting point. That's what the county says are the uses out there. It's not necessarily your view, but it's what's on the books now, so we wanted to acknowledge that. We wanted to start with a good basis of information. And then I noticed in your general plan, there's one of your general plan study areas, area 5, I believe, that is outside the city limits. And so I put the land uses for that area on the figure that you have in front of you too. Again, just so you can see what kind of land uses are present there just outside your boundary. And that's one of the areas, because it is in your general plan, it's one of the areas that we're going to look at for the sphere in addition to service areas. So those are the things that we're going to do. There's a series of determinations. I've given your staff a questionnaire which will be providing us the information. So I'm here tonight to just let you know that we're proceeding, that the sphere of influence update is another opportunity for this council and this community to look at where you might grow. There's no requirement to grow, but if you're thinking about it, this is a good way, in addition to your general plan, to make those considerations, to have that discussion. And then if you wanted specific areas considered, then you would direct your staff to include that in the questionnaire and in the information that you'll be providing back to us. We'll give that good consideration too. And then we'll be bringing a draft sphere of influence back for your consideration. Our practice is to give the special districts and the cities the opportunity to review that. We'll do a workshop with our commission, and then we'll set the matter for public hearing. Very open process, very inclusive process, and we're looking forward to continuing to work with your staff and with you on this. That's really what I wanted to say tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I think we might have a couple questions. Do we have?
Sure.
I do. So, first of all, I would love it if you could explain to the lay people in the audience what the sphere of influence is. But my follow-up question, especially in regards to these, the interchanges where we may want to control or potentially prevent development out there so that we can retain our business dollars in town.
Sure.
If it was adopted in our sphere of influence, it's not in our city limits.
No.
So if it was included in our sphere of influence, what control would that give us over those spaces?
Well, in the sphere of influence, in terms of land uses, not much, but the sphere is a boundary. It's a boundary that defines where the city is likely to grow in a 10, possibly a 20-year period. So and that means annexation. When I'm talking about growth, when the way the commission looks at that is that if the city felt like these were potential annexation areas within a 10 to 20 year time frame, then they should go in the sphere. And you have a couple of planning tools available to you. One is the sphere of influence update, which we are here to help with. The other is to do some general plan update. And some cities do pre-zoning of areas within their general plan context for areas that they think they might want to annex in the future, bring them into their planning area. There's other plan mechanisms. So LAFCO does not have a land use authority, so we are not the ones to advise you on what the land use is for unincorporated areas. That is the purview and the authority of the county. But you, as a city, if you think that those are areas that you want to consider for annexation, you do have the authority to declare that and plan for that and pre-zone those areas the way you feel they should be designated. And if it's preservation of resource lands and no development, that's very appropriate. If it's and the city could be very proactive in taking action on the land surrounding those interchanges, as you say, if you want to preserve some economic interest in it. So those are the two things, and we often work parallel with the county, and so and cities. If you wanted to do a general plan, do some work within your general plan program, we would certainly be working with you. But so to summarize, 5 or 10 year annexation growth commitment, or at least intent. No land uses from us, but you have the authority to do land uses through another venue. And it really is a planning mechanism, pure and simple.
And just sort of on a related topic, at the workshop we had the other day with our LAFCO attorney, he brought up the idea that if you want to preserve open space, you should not include it in your sphere. Now that's because presumably there would be an intent to develop out there if we included it?
And
Is that the rationale?
yeah, and he did say that,
Yeah.
and I have, while I never disagree with legal counsel, I will tell you that there is another perspective on that, and I've seen cities use that, where if a city did want to protect resource lands, and there are cities with resource lands within their sphere and within their boundary, you could adopt resource protection policies. They would have to be equal or better than what the county has. But that is an alternative. You could say, we want to designate these areas resource lands, but accompanying that, we want to draft within our general plan protection policies so that it's very clear to all parties this is how the city would protect these lands. And generally, legal counsel was correct. If it's just open ag land or rangeland or timberlands, but you have kind of extenuating circumstances here. And those extenuating circumstances are the bypass. So while he's right in the broadest application, there's given special circumstances, you have an alternative that you could consider. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Well, following on that, if we want simply to preserve those areas as resource conservation areas, would an application to actually, look forward to annexing them, having them in the sphere of influence, would that be a legitimate annexation area? Because without it being city boundaries, we are sort of at the mercy of whatever the county decides, even if we
Right.
have really strong policies, because they're the ones that have the land use authority.
They do.
So my question would be, if we are serious about wanting to protect that area, can we annex that as a resource conservation area? Or is that?
You could certainly propose that. Annexations are the purview of LAFCO, so the city could preserve that. But I will tell you that anything that came to LAFCO for annexation, especially given that there's resource designations there currently, your resource protection commitment would have to be stronger. And so if you wanted to do that, but there's good resource protection there now. And if you have a good relationship with the county and have confidence that the county will protect those and preserve those resource lands, there's no commercial designations out there, so the things that sometimes pop up around an interchange would not be consistent with any of those designations. So you have that option. You could say, we just affirm we're going to keep these areas out of our sphere, but we're going to affirm the county designations and support that and intend to, continue to keep in touch with the county and make sure that they do their job in adhering to those land uses and to their policies.
George?
Yeah.
Isn't the process for annexation or is there more than one? Isn't an applicant by the landowner? I mean, doesn't the annexation process initiated by the landowners, and doesn't there have to be some 4/5 or 2/3 or some kind of LAFCO may have the final say-so of whether that happens, but it isn't the city's, it isn't a unilateral decision of the city to annex something. It has to come with a consent of the landowners that are going to be annexed too, isn't that correct?
Not necessarily. There's two options, and no, this city could adopt, there's a procedure, and I can explain all the parts. You have to do a plan for services. There would be an environmental review because it's a discretionary action. But the city, you have the right to pass a resolution of application to annex properties into your city. You, as a council, have that right. And that resolution of application would then come to LAFCO, and that would be considered. Now, also, as you pointed out, landowner petition can do that too. LAFCO, our commission, strongly encourages the agency that would provide service to be the applicant, but it is allowed under policy in the act that landowners may petition directly to LAFCO to be annexed into the city. And then finally, last part, there is a protest proceeding. So once the commission acts, whether it be on a petition or on a city application by resolution, then if it's uninhabited, then the property owners are sent ballots, and 0 to 25% protest. The commission action stands, 25 plus 1 to 50. It goes to a vote, and ballots are sent out to all property owners in there. If it's inhabited, then it's a combination of property owners and registered voters. But if it's 50 plus 1 protest, and it's weighted depending on the inhabited, uninhabited circumstance, the protest is successful and the annexation does not happen. So ultimately, it is the property owners and the
Property
voters.
owners.
Yeah.
That's what I
Ultimately, they have the authority.
Yeah.
Yes.
Your land use map, it does lay out these different land uses, but I noticed in some areas it's blank, particularly around the southern interchange and also along the corridor on the northern side, on the west side of the highway down to the city limits. There is no color designation, but there has to be, I imagine, some kind of a zoning land use for those gray areas.
Yeah.
Caltrans zoning?
Yeah, well, if it's, I believe at the south interchange, I believe that the undesignated area around the little yellow square is right-of-way. And right-of-way carries no land use designation. It's strictly dedicated right-of-way for transportation purposes. And then I just grabbed land uses immediately around the interchange. There certainly are county land use designations in between the areas shaded and the city boundary there at the south and even at the north. I was just trying to capture just the immediate area around the interchange.
Okay, because I know that there is some commercial development on the northern end, roughly, I'm guessing, in that area that isn't shaded.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did not, now, would that be inside the city or outside the
I
city?
think some of it is outside the city.
Okay, so it looks like on the west side of the current 101,
Yep, I'm looking here.
yeah, it looks like there's an unshaded area, looks like it's tree covered, and then the area to the right, east, excuse me, which is one of your general plan study areas, yeah, that's in the city, and I just didn't
Yeah.
map that. 'cause
Yeah, I
figured-
wasn't looking at inside the city. So on the southern, that is under this right-of-way, the Caltrans right-of-way, what exactly does that mean? That Caltrans has the right to do anything they want to in that area?
It means that they own that land and they have designated it for transportation right-of-way. I think anything that the state does through that acquisition process, it has to be transportation related.
Okay, so Howard Johnson's can't appeal for a
That would be
service center.
precedent setting.
Okay, just curious.
I don't believe that a private entity can use public right-of-way for commercial purpose, at least not seen it in my practice.
Okay.
Well, they certainly have sold public right away though.
They would have to vacate and sell, absolutely. In
Done it
order
right-
for that
they've
to
done it in
happen,
this town.
you would be notified.
Can I ask an additional question? And this is just sort of, I think, important to think about when we're talking about this planning process. This area sort of in the left, the turquoise suburban residential, that is, here in town we would think about that as like the area by Della Avenue. There's many residences. I don't know if we have water hookups that may have historically been given out there, but there's no sewer. It's impacted, a lot of people live there, but if you're on one side of Della, you're in the city, and on the
Right.
other, you're out. So that has been discussed over time as a reasonable place to annex. But what would that mean if we put that in our sphere with a plan to annex it, say would that mean that we would have to provide sewer services?
We
Those
would
parcels?
want to see a plan for that. We would want to see possibly a capital improvement program projected out, a capacity analysis. Yeah, we're gonna ask you some pretty pointed questions about your ability to serve areas that if you're thinking about annexing them, that's our job.
And then the property owners and residents, if LAFCO decided that the city could annex that property, then the property owners and residents there would be a protest vote procedure
Absolutely.
to say if they wanted, and if they all said, no, we don't want to be annexed to the city,
51%.
51%.
Oh, yeah, it's
But
only
land
50.
vote, somehow you got a combination of land voting and
Yeah.
people
And
voting.
voters.
And once we understand the uninhabited condition, then we can advise you what that, we can give you the details. But Mayor is right, 50+1 and we're done.
And we just did that with people wanting to be in the Fort Bragg Fire District when they weren't, when they were previously out, and the property owners sort of initiated that for insurance purposes.
Well, that issue around that southwest area of proposed annexation has mostly, I think, wastewater perk problems, and, all those people are on septic systems, and so I think that has, has been one of the drivers on, historically, why that has been looked at as a possible annexation. Adrian had a
So George, on the county would have to, if they wanted to change any of these land uses that are designated here, they would have to go through a rezoning process, is that right?
They'd have to start with a general plan amendment.
Okay.
Yeah, before they can even think about zoning. They would have to do a general plan amendment, they would have to send the city a referral, you would have the right to a comment, they would have to prepare a CEQA document analyzing the potential effects, they would have to project any change in traffic, services, that sort of thing. Typically, going to that, they need to designate a service provider. The county is not in the business of providing any of the services that would normally be associated with developed use. That is the purview of cities and special districts. So, yeah, it is a general plan amendment process, then an environmental review, then zoning. And so you would definitely, I would expect, be quite involved in that.
Yeah, sure.
One other quick question was, for that southwest area, would it be advisable, or there's some pros and cons about doing that in stages rather than such a large area all at once, if we wanted to move forward with, with just see how the first section went instead of doing an entire big quadrant there at once? Is it-
You've given me an opportunity to make a very important point. Commission does not advocate. We are truly an impartial review, 7 members, 2 city, 2 county, 2 special district, and a public member, and it is truly independent review. So what you can expect is I have seen phased proposals, and I think that is prudent in many cases, because it takes time to generate capacity and growth occurs slowly. And so I think a phased approach by the city would be very prudent, and I would encourage you to do that. But we are here to provide information, to help you through the process, to give you that good, impartial, independent review, and engage the property owners and the voters in whatever decision-making comes about.
Adrian, what's the next step in this process for us?
Well, I hate to suggest a committee, but
Abandoned one.
obviously we're going to have to commit some focused time to study our options and formulate a recommendation. The council would have to approve whatever course we want to pursue in an application, and the application process itself, once we submit something to LAFCO, would take about how long?
If it comes from the city, resolution of application, that means that it would be accompanied by a plan for services. It would be accompanied by a CEQA document that you would prepare, and if there's property tax consideration, then it would also involve the city and the county. Some cities and counties have master property tax revenue sharing agreements, some don't. If you have one, that's great, and if you don't, then there's a negotiation process with the county as part of annexation for property tax share. So those are important considerations for the city to be making, but if all that comes and is complete to us at the commission, then an annex, let's say 6 to 9 months, unless we get it really into some controversy. But we try to move these along in recognition that they usually come with a lot of work from the applying agency, and so we try to respect that and move it through.
Just a second.
Yeah.
I do have a.
Well, just a second,
Okay.
though.
Okay.
That's if we want to, if we're not planning to do an annexation and we're just
Adopting our same one, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Or-
adopting an existing sphere influence, and these, we're just itemizing our out-of-area service agreements, or whatever you call them, the water hookups that we have here and there.
Yeah.
We don't trigger that level of
Oh, no. I was trying to give you kind of the all-in.
all-in deal of an
All-in
annex
deal.
kind of.
But no, that is the all-in deal. And then beyond, scaling back from that, if it's just looking at sphere areas, service, it becomes much simpler, and I would expect then,
It's almost an MSR.
yeah, kind of an MSR outside your boundaries. That's a very good way to look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we got it covered here.
That's what I was gonna clarify, that The less staff-intensive version would be to adopt a sphere that's coterminous with our city limits, correct?
It would, however, I will say that we're going to be taking a really good look at the areas that you're serving
Right.
outside, and it's quite likely that, just fair full disclosure, staff will probably be recommending that your areas that you're serving come into your sphere. That's
I
why
don't know how
we-
you could deny it.
What?
I don't know how you could deny it, that we would, I mean, we would have to include this.
I think so,
Yeah,
but
so that's why I see the same.
Excellent. Just for a question for the rest of the council. I know that there's out-of-area service agreements out, Exley Lane, Della, those areas, but are there some of those in the direction of the southern interchange?
Yeah, I mean, they go out to
All
the
the way up to
mobile,
the
home. They go
reservoir,
out,
right?
water goes out to the mobile home park.
Yeah.
No sewer goes out there, but I think water is served all the way out to the mobile home park, just this side of the railroad tracks.
So that's something
And
that the
it's-
committee would
And
need
it's
to look
served
at.
out
yeah.
to the mobile home park out in the valley.
okay, those are.
It's actually
out to
it's served up to the lake up there on the Ridgewood grade on the opposite side
So
of
it's
the road.
possible our sphere might come awfully close to
It goes past it, around it.
the southern interchange at least.
Well,
Anyway,
I mean, we
potentially.
supply water out there, we don't supply
Sure.
all services.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, this is just an information item to the council this evening. We're just beginning a process. We do take public comment on any item on here this evening, but this is not the discussion on herbicide application, so, but that is coming up next. So the more we belabor that, the longer we'll be before we get to it. So do we have any public comments? Did I talk you out of it well enough to pursue that? Okay.
I had one quickly.
Please, no, you need to come up and identify yourself.
I'm Bear Kameroff, live in town, and I was curious if the sphere of influence is something that has some legal muscle, I guess the word, some legal, something that it can force something to do, or is it just a concept? If I'm phrasing my question correctly. Or does a sphere of influence, like zoning, it must be done this way, it can't be done that way? Does sphere of influence mean that the city has some control over property out there that they can police?
Sure.
Should I respond
Yeah.
here or there?
You need to go up there. Thanks, George.
I just trying to get a handle on what it means.
No, it's a very good question. Again, no land use authority, so there would be no city land uses applied within the sphere. It is the most important consideration of a sphere is that you cannot annex any lands that aren't in your sphere. So it's like the precursor. It's here's where we think we're going to grow, and then if you do end up growing and annexing, then it has to be within your sphere. So that's really the most valuable aspect of a sphere of influence, is that it really defines where you could potentially grow and potentially annex.
Thank you, George. Anybody else? Okay, we're going to move on. Like I say, I'm going to jump to our item 11.
Thank you, look forward to
Yeah,
working with you.
thanks, George. Feel free to find your way home. This item is brought forward by a council member, and it's a discussion and possible adoption of a resolution opposing use of pesticides in, don't you mean herbicides, or do you mean both?
I'll explain that.
Okay. Anyway, in the bypass mitigation areas. I believe this is brought forward by a council member, so I would ask her to introduce it. We
Okay.
will go from there.
Well, as many of you already know, First of all, Caltrans had committed for many, this doesn't,
I know, but you.
I'll try, okay. So Caltrans had repeatedly said they would not use herbicides in the project, in the bypass project, up until, it didn't change on their website until November, like right around Thanksgiving. But it was in the environmental impact report, it was been on their website, it was in the earlier versions of the mitigation monitoring plan, which is MMP, both the federal and state, which is the Corps of Engineers, which is protecting the wetlands, and the Department of Water, Regional Water Quality Control Board, which is concerned with the quality of the water in the creeks, and Fish and Wildlife and so forth, all of whom had been participating in those MMP negotiations. But just in November of 2014, they reversed what we thought was a long-standing commitment not to use herbicides or pesticides in the project, and instead are saying, well, we're not going to use it in the footprint of the bypass, but we are going to use it in the mitigation wetland areas because they feel like they're under pressure to do it quickly, and the hand control mechanism, other methods they are arguing would take too long. So I'm very, very concerned that that is not a valid reason to use poison on our mitigation wetlands and right next to our creeks. So this affects our valley residents who depend on the wells. It could very well affect our own city well that we may need to rely on in sometime in the future for our domestic water here in the city. It certainly affects all of the wildlife. It affects anybody that is going to be out there in those wetland areas and everybody downstream. So that's why I brought this. And I'm using the word pesticide because in the RFP, the request for proposal that Caltrans put out to the contractors who are going to do this actual mitigation work, they listed 3 pages of potential pesticides that could be used, and that included some insecticides and rodenticides in addition to 2 pages worth of herbicides. And basically what Caltrans is saying, these are all legal to use, and it's up to the contractor who gets the contract what they propose to do, which chemicals they would use. I have had conversations with Phil Frisbee, and he said their intent is that they would only use herbicides and only on Himalayan blackberries and so forth. That it would be there would be no widespread aerial spraying. It would only be done by hand spraying or painting it on. But I think once the contractor has the contract and it says any of these are legal to use, we don't have much influence over that anymore. And so I felt like it was important to have the resolution apply to all of that entire list of potential pesticides in addition to the intended only herbicide. So I'm using the words kind of interchangeably. Herbicide is one kind of pesticide, gets rid of weeds. The wording of the resolution, it would only be an advisory resolution. The city council does not actually have authority to prohibit the contractor or Caltrans from using these pesticides. But we do have influence. They should pay attention to what we in the city, which is affected by this, and our surrounding property owners who are depending on their water resources, they should be listening to our city. And we as the elected body of the city, I think, should weigh in telling them we do not want them to authorize this kind of pesticide use, and we don't want them to allow the contractor to do it either. And the other thing about the resolution is that I would like it to be sent to the state and federal agencies that have authority over Caltrans, and also to our elected officials at the higher levels and the Board of Supervisors, so that everybody can weigh in and be a moral, if not legal, prohibition from this happening. So I don't think I need to actually read the, or,
No, we've read it.
yeah. If anyone out there wants to, it's over there.
Do we have comments from up here before we open it to the
I
public?
do have a question. Do you know, has the Board of Supervisors discussed this topic, or is it on their calendar that you're aware of?
It was mentioned yesterday at the Board of Supervisors. They were on a different matter. They were talking about the hack and squirt in the forest lands. But Supervisor Woodhouse did say that he felt it was appropriate to oppose the use of herbicides in Little Lake Valley, and he said he would bring that to the Board of Supes, but I don't think it is agendized yet. But I certainly think if we pass this resolution, that would, kind of invite them to do likewise.
Any other comments up here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I need a little bit of education on this whole process here. And it would be wonderful if whoever can answer the questions, was a recognized authority, not just something that you read on the internet, just to put that out there. So you mentioned that you have this list of Caltrans approved chemicals. Right, and what exactly does this list mean?
It's basically saying that any of these could be used legally on a Caltrans project.
Okay, and what does that mean? I mean, where does that legality and that authority come from? I assume it comes from studies that are done by chemical experts that unless somebody just made them up and got them passed by the legislature. I have to believe, unless I'm shown otherwise, that this is a legitimate list, and it's there. It's approved for a reason. Is there any reason for me to not believe that? Well, if I'm hearing laughter, come on up here and explain it to me. That's what I'm asking for.
We will, here, just a second. I'm not ready to take public comments quite yet.
Okay.
Maybe very close, but
Okay, so I mean
Hey!
that's something. Okay, store up the questions, for answers. I mean, that's a question that I have. These things just don't fall out of the sky. They're there for a reason, and if it's a wrong reason, then I need to know about it. The other thing is that if we take this approved chemical list, and my understanding is that it's not just a list of chemicals, it's also includes how these things should be applied, and I believe that agencies like the EPA and the Corps of Engineers and all these agencies that control everything that we do have written some pretty pretty concise rules and regulations on how to use and how to apply these things that Caltrans would be bound to observe.
And who's licensed to apply them?
Exactly, and who, the license, all this stuff, it just doesn't, I don't think that Caltrans just goes into the yellow pages and calls up, some yahoo that has a spray gun and invites them to come and start spraying around. So if somebody can clarify that for me and demonstrate that this is a loose cannon project.
Anybody else care to make any comments here before? Okay, we'll take comments from the public on this. It's a 3-minute chance to speak, and we will listen to, try not to be repetitive. If you feel like you have the same thing to say that somebody else said, say that I agree with them, or I want to add this other bit of information. Yes, feel free to come up to the microphone and introduce yourself. I think there's a sign-in sheet. There is also the little deal on the side, is that operating? That will give you a green light and then a yellow light and ultimately the red light, and then I will ask you to move to the next speaker. Yes, sir.
I'm Tim Rice. To answer your question, Ron, it starts with the second Constitution of our United States, called the Constitution, and the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause of our Constitution places the rights of commerce above the rights of people. So they get to do whatever they want, no matter whether or not it's a good idea, because it's business. That's right there in our Constitution. That's kind of like our whole problem. And as far as your environmental regulations and stuff, I would highly encourage you to read the history of the Interstate Commerce Commission, the first regulatory body in our country that was supposedly regulating railroads, and how it was carefully crafted to look like it was going to do something and not really do anything. And the head of that organization talking to the railroad president at the time, saying it was a really good thing because it would look like it did stuff, and over time industry could get in there and tweak it to whatever they needed. And all regulatory organizations have been modeled on that. So to think that because there's a regulatory body in charge of that, actually protecting us from the poisons of pesticides, a little bit naive. And okay, that's to answer your question. On a personal comment, I'm having a hard time understanding how anybody could consider poisoning our life support system a good idea. Simple as that.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, my name is Polly Gervin. I'm a consultant with the Coyote Valley Band of Pomo Indians, your neighbors down the valley, Redwood Valley. We have been concerned about the proposed pesticide uses on the state parcels. Now, mind you, the Army Corps and the feds, they are not. They did not want to pesticide, and they are not going to pesticide spray. There's two parcels of mitigation lands, fed and state. It's only the state that's so chosen. And our concern is for the basket weavers. We are going to be given an easement. We're negotiating with Caltrans mitigation for the damaged sites that they have continued to do up there. And we are being given easement rights into the future mitigation parcels for our gatherers of medicine and for our gatherers of basket-making materials. And this poisons our basket makers. They insert the willows, they insert the sedge as they're constructing their baskets. And many basket weavers throughout the state of California who've gathered in sprayed areas encounter rashes in their mouth, rashes in the throat. I also, at a public forum here in Willits, very interesting on herbicides, very informative, really, and that's where Woodhouse also publicly declared his opposition to the spraying in this valley here. We were given horrifying testimony by the field workers in our area. They hand apply these sprays with tanks attached to their bodies, which often leak, and they have to work directly in these areas. They are encountering high incidence of poison, kids with real bad deformities, not enough toes and fingers, high incidence of cancer. So I also want to say that for the people, the workers who will be exposed out there, they're in danger of direct poisoning, and our basket weavers and gatherers who are going to be given rights to gather in perpetuity in the mitigation parcels. We gather by the water sides, and we're very frightened that we'll be given a poison package for our future gatherers. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Don't be shy, because if there's more than a little bit of a pause, I'll probably close this hearing. So
They push a button or just goes?
No, just
it goes on
introduce
its own?
yourself and go.
Okay, my name is Karen Sue Davis. I've lived in Willits area for between 30 and 35 years. My kids were born in Fort Bragg and they were raised in Willits. They're no longer in Willits. I believe that Willits is already toxic. In my early 40s, I experienced a life-threatening illness called an end-of-life tumor. And the tumor board at Stanford said, we don't see these unless you're over 85. I had it in my early 40s. I lived in Willits. So they took it out. We did a dose-dense chemotherapy. It's gone. Now there's a tumor in my right long bone in the medullary cavity. Anybody who's had A&P knows what the medullary cavity does. It produces your blood cells.
What?
It produces your blood cells, your white blood cells. It's part of your immune system. I've lived in Willits. This is it. So I believe that it's an accumulative effect that these toxins, I mean, we've had Remco, people are using Roundup in their yards. We've had Willits Little Lake Furniture. They've come in, they had stain line and toxins that were going into the creek. There were all kinds of issues. Isn't this enough? Now, I may have an exit door, but I'm connected to all of you. On some level, I am you. We're not 99% and 1%. We are 100% energetically. And it's knowing what we're creating, because it always wears a different dress. So the issue here is that it may be, oh, that's good. Have a nice time. That's your exit door. See ya. But I am you. I am you. Now, I just had a visit with the supervisors yesterday, and I went in, and those supervisors, the chairwoman had already made her mind up. You could tell from the way that she was responding in the meeting. She was already siding with this guy from the lumber mill. She's already made her mind up. Closed-door meetings. Closed-door meetings is because you don't want the common citizens to hear what's going on. You don't get to hide things like that. It's just not appropriate, is it? So
Can you wrap it up, please?
yeah, I see that. So I'm getting the feeling sometimes that it's the same way here, that the minds are already made up. And I can go, and I can take what's mine with me and never return to the material plane. But I'm not going to own those karmic consequences. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, right here.
Hello, I'm Cynthia Reiser-Jevons, and I'm here to say that if we poison the land, we essentially are poisoning ourselves, our children. The poison does not go away. Unfortunately, over the last 30 years or so, the regulatory agencies have really been taken over by the corporations that produce the pesticides. And so we have not been given the truth, and now we will be paying the consequences. Very recently, and here I found just now a little, an article from the New York Times, weed killer long cleared is doubted. Well, it's more than doubted. And this is from the New York Times. 30 years ago, an Environmental Protection Agency committee determined that the popular weed killer Roundup might cause cancer. 6 years later, in 1991, the agency reversed itself after reevaluating the study. Well, we've been infiltrated by the corporations. Now the issue is back again in an even bigger way. An agency of WHO, the World Health Organization, has declared that glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, probably causes cancer. One piece of evidence the agency cited is the same mouse study. The declaration drew an angry response from Monsanto, the maker of Roundup, which has accused the agency of having an agenda and cherry-picking the data to support its case. The conclusion is starkly at odds with every credible scientific body that has examined glyphosate safety, said Monsanto's vice president. Monsanto has a stranglehold on the research that is done using their products. They actually won't allow their products to be studied without their approval. And even if a study is approved, if they don't like the results, they say it can't go out. So this is what we've been laboring under for a long time. Officials at the agency, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, say they had no agenda other than to inform the World Health Organization that the conclusion was based on studies of people, laboratory animals, and cells. All the cell lines evidence sorts say the same thing, which we ought to be concerned about this, said Aaron Blair, retired epidemiologist from the National Cancer Institute, who was chairman of the group of 17 reviewers from around the world. Agreement on the classification was unanimous. We're going to be seeing this happen more and more and more. The truth cannot be denied. If we poison the land, we poison the environment, we poison ourselves. Please do not allow Caltrans to do this for their mere convenience. Your children, your grandchildren, all the people in the future of Willits are relying on you doing the right thing. Let's say no to the poison. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
My name is Linda Posner, and I have a question. I'm really needing your help on this, everybody's. We just passed this, the Measure S, that we in this community have a right to say how things are used here, resources, how things are cared for in this community. We live here and we have the ability to say something. I don't know where all that is in this situation. The other thing I want to know is, I keep hearing we've gone past this idea that I heard that it was in the Caltrans information or whatever is the pledge, the legalities, that they would not be using herbicides. And yet, what happened? It's like we're already not even looking at that. How can that be? And I'm asking you, how can that be completely ignored now? And we're working on, well, we've got to really, who studied this, and are we, how much are they going to use, and we'll be able to save the Pomo sites, and I don't understand why we're even there right now. What happened to the we will not use pesticides? 2 pages, two different documents, and what happened to it? It went up in smoke. I mean, I'm really I don't know what happened to it, because we're not even talking about that. What happened to our, we have control because we live here over what gets done to our land and our resources, and what happened to their legal documents that are quoted and we read in the paper and I've seen them? What happened? I need to know. Thank you so much, and please do the right thing.
Thank you. Yes?
Naomi Wagner, Spring Creek. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Ron, for, as the LAFCO representative said, for giving us the opportunity to answer your questions. And we certainly didn't want to laugh at that. But we do have to really rely on, we have to look deeper and dig deeper for some of the information that you may want to find out about these things. And we have to look at the self-interest in the studies that have been done and the sources of those studies so that we can really evaluate their validity. And I think you would agree with that because you have an inquiring mind about it. But we can't just accept these things at face value. And if you look back in the history of approval of herbicides and pesticides, you find one after another that were considered to be safe and deemed safe, and we were told they were safe, and then only to find out that they weren't. And that has been the subject of massive litigations and also of a lot of suffering. And it seems like when we talk about our personal suffering, you know, I can talk about my youngest son who went to Bechtel Grove and played in the creek and lost 100% kidney function at the age of 22. And you know, you don't always connect up the dots. I didn't connect up the dots. But that seems to be a very probable source of a lifelong disability and a huge amount of pain and suffering and loss of productivity and development. And that's multiplied out over and over by all the people who are exposed to these unknown possible carcinogens that are deemed to be safe. It's a lot of individual suffering that isn't recognized because the people don't either have the money to sue or can't actually prove the connections. But I think that, you know, something that was said yesterday at the supervisors on the subject was that we have the cautionary principle, and that is that when we don't know, which we really can't maybe say definitively, you know, A plus B equals C, but we have the obligation to err on the side of caution. And that's what I urge you to do. I think that you will not regret that, and that in the meantime, you'll have time to do the research and look into the subject at greater depth to come to some conclusions that you can really, you know, think that you have enough information. Because I think that your questions indicate that you don't. And so I encourage you to do that, and I encourage all of you to vote to keep the herbicides out of the valley at this time and forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Tom Mann. I really heard what Linda Posner was saying, and that was the point I was going to make. In my mind, it's a matter of integrity. We have a government group who have made statements to us about how they were going to conduct our business for us in our valley, and they're going around the corner again, and it doesn't work for me.
Yeah, Ellen.
My name is Ellen Drell, and I also want to thank Ron for his question, because it's a good question. And just to let you know, even for some of us who try to make these kinds of things our focus, it's the world of herbicides and insecticides and pesticides and their safety and their use is in turmoil right now. Because as Naomi mentioned, things that we thought were safe are turning out not to be safe. And just to give you an idea, one of the insecticides that Caltrans is suggesting be used out in the valley to presumably control some pest insects has been temporarily banned in the state of Washington and Oregon and in Idaho, because it's suspected to be a killer of pollinators, including honeybees. So that pesticide is on hold in those other 3 states. Some of them not necessarily known for their environmental inclinations. And another one of the pesticides that Caltrans is suggesting using, a rodenticide, has recently been subject of all kinds of litigation and restrictions. It's no longer available on retail store shelves because it works as it kills mammals by thinning the blood to the extent that the mammals bleed to death, but unfortunately they take several days to die, so that the other predators that eat those mammals, including raptors, also are affected by the poison. And so there are all these unintended targets out there, unintended consequences. So there are lots of new restrictions just imposed in the last few months, and throughout the country on certain federal wildlife reserves, they're prohibiting the use of this rodenticide. It's not surprising to me that these are on Caltrans lists of allowed pesticides, because Caltrans is in the business of building roads. It's not in the business of environmental protection. That's our business. And it's a complicated one. So I appreciate your question, Ron, but I think we should be skeptical of this list that Caltrans has put in front of us. And I just want to say that I was involved in the early drafts of the mitigation plan, and I am personally familiar with the conversations that went on between the agencies and Caltrans. And I know that the Army Corps biologist's first assessment of Little Lake Valley was that it was a darn good, functioning, beautiful place. It had some problems, yes, but the Army Corps and the other agencies are going to have to work darn hard to come up with any schemes to, quote unquote, enhance the function of Little Lake Valley. The Army Corps biologist said the seasonal wetland is functioning well. There aren't that many invasive species. There are native wetland species that are holding their own pretty well, and maybe we can do a few things to nudge them along. But basically, the valley is beautiful. It's functioning. And I know from my 45 years living here, as far as I know, there's never been a broad-scale use of herbicides in Little Lake Valley. We have a precious resource out there.
Wrap it up, Ellen.
Okay, the other agencies also recognized what the Army Corps was saying was correct, which is why they were very, very proud that their first drafts of the mitigation plan said specifically no herbicides. They didn't even go into the area of pesticides, but they said no herbicides. And the man from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, who was the main liaison with Caltrans, said that that was one of the things he was most proud of in working with Caltrans, that he had gotten Caltrans to agree that they would not use herbicides. The only reason Caltrans wants to use it now is because they feel pressured by time, but I think if we don't need to buy into that. I think we need to.
Ellen, thank you.
So I urge you to support the resolution.
Anybody else? David?
Nobody else signed in, do I have to? I'm Dave Watts, I live here in Willits. Ron, to answer your question, and it's a good one, it comes down to a matter of trust at the end. Other people here would say you can't trust the EPA, and so if you want to trust the list the EPA has, then you certainly have the right to do so. There were a bunch of studies they base it on. Whether they were biased or not is something you decide as your as a voter for it. A history of it, of course, just use DDT. We could have been here in the early 50s doing the same conversation and saying, some people coming aboard saying, hey, I think there's a problem. I see birds, having things. And you're saying, well, but I see it on the list, so I'm going to use it. It's a learning process is the point. We're all learning, okay? And we all choose which side of the learning fence we want to be on sometimes, okay? So if you want to say the EPA has this list and you want them to use anything on it, I recognize that and it's legitimate, okay? But the cautionary principle probably has some weight too. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say on that. Main thing I like to say here is the city does have some precedent here for protecting your wetland resource out there, your streams and your groundwater. I mean, you certainly have a big interest in it, your well and all that. The city, well, my wife and I did the landscape design for the new hospital. And one of the biggest features, most of the landscape at the new hospital is called bioretention facilities. They're engineered facilities that we design, the plants for. The purpose of the bioretention facilities are to filtrate and clean contaminants out of the source, meaning the driveways there, the parking lots, the roof, the landscape, before it enters Hell Creek. Okay, and the city mandated the hospital do that. And the city is in a forward-looking, just say perspective of doing that, that's where it all headed. It's headed to protect the source, pollutants before they enter into the stream, okay? So as interested, people who control our city here, you're certainly within the proper, let's just say where it's going to say a supportive letter like Madge has to say, we are concerned on some of these chemicals because we want our water, clean. So you're not out of it doesn't hurt to say we're concerned, okay? Obviously, you would have to go down the whole list that they have and look at them and try to analyze and say this is good and bad and this is good. The problem I have with Madge's thing as it's written, Madge, is it's much too broad. Okay, pesticides as such as everything. So therefore, I took very serious the intent of a bioretention facility when I did the design. We also have the responsibility of watching it being installed. So, one, if you see a white bobbing head out there, that's been me picking by hand weeds from the native sod, which is the biofiltration medium we use. I did it by hand, weeds that were introduced from hydroseeding earlier and that were contaminations of the sod we bought in.
Need to start wrapping up.
Okay, so what I'm saying here is that, well, now I lost track. Well, I was just on a roll. Jeez. Okay, so it's true. I also use insecticidal soap. I use herbicidal soap. Okay, you're too broad in your thing of saying all pesticides need to be limited, because those are very safe compounds to use. I use flaming, which Barbara Lee's not on there. We use 3 inches of wood chip mulch to help hold weeds down. Hand pulling, mechanical, etc. So it's sort of like, how do you do that? Is that you have to go in there and express at least. We would like that list looked at. Okay. The approach that we have used for the recommendation for the establishment period is IPM, Integrated Pest Management. You have a graduated list. You use the least toxic, you use the cultural and mechanical means. The last resort, and that has to be then laid out very clear, the last resort is you do something that could be harmful for that. Roundup does kill frogs and amphibians. We have bioponds over there. They're croaking all the time, and if Roundup is used there extensively, they're gone. Yeah. And we're related to them, by the way.
Somewhat closely, probably.
That's Jeremiah. He was a bullfrog.
My name is Bernard Kameroff, and I echo just about everything I heard today, except that I don't think Madge's proposal is not too broad, and that's because I've seen that the agencies that have the authority to authorize poisons can juggle around that quite nicely and pick anything they want. And over, I've seen poisons that were safe, like everybody said, suddenly not safe. Now, Caltrans told us over and over that they didn't need any poisons to handle this bypass. And now, because they say they're in a hurry, suddenly they need poisons to do this bypass. And I personally want to say that I have supported this bypass for all the 20-some years I've been in Willits, but I don't want to see any poisons in our valley. There's absolutely unnecessary. There's safe means to do it. I think caution is the word for our health. And finally, for Caltrans being so wise and having so much knowledge, I've been reading about the Bay Bridge for the last 6 months. Almost every other day in the paper, every week in the paper, there's another disclosure of Caltrans totally bungling a situation which now appears that maybe will cause this bridge to collapse. And this is Caltrans over and over stumbling, making mistakes, making bad decisions. It has nothing to do with pesticides, but it's the same people who are making the same decisions. So I seriously encourage you to tell them a deal is a deal, just like Mr. Mann said. They promised us something, and we'd like to ask them to stick to their promise. Thank you.
Anybody else? Second, third, and last call. Okay, I'm going to bring this back up here. Does anybody have any other further comments, Larry?
And I'm not saying what way I'm going to vote, but I was one person that, and I don't know how many other people did this, but I went to Caltrans to get the areas that were sprayed and how they were going to be sprayed.
Proposed to be sprayed.
And I have the document here. First of all, I did not know what they meant by using the herbicides on the particular plants and stuff. So I have the plant removal light treatment, I have the plant removal heavy treatment, and I have the plant removal target weeds. And that's the 3 ways that they're going to do it. The light treatment, and you can look in the map and look at it, is everything is going to be cut down to the ground. And consequently, The light treatment, everything that's shaded in a light treatment removal is just going to be cut down to the ground. The second set, which is a heavier hash marks, is removal of the heavy treatment, and what they're going to do is they're going to cut below the surface of the dirt and take that section out. The third one is that they're going to cut the weeds down, and then they're going to spray, hand spray on the soil that they have designated that that's the way they're going to do it. And I'm not saying one way or the other, I'm just saying that how many people went and got one of these to find out how it's going to be done. Thank you. And because it's not easy to get this. It took me 3 weeks to get it. And anyhow, it just brought it up to me because I don't know what I thought, but I thought maybe that they were just going to spray the brambles and whatever, the whole bush. But that's not what's going to happen. And, you know, I just think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I'm not one that is going to go for any spraying at all. I'll just put that out front, right up. But I also think that as a council that we need to go and get all of the facts that we possibly can to know what is going on. And that's the thing, and I kept telling Madge when she was talking to me about it, is I need a map and I need some more information. Well, I didn't get it, so I finally went to Caltrans and tried to get it. And I'm not for spraying anything for the simple reason that there's a lot of frogs, there's a lot of other animals that are out in the valley that I don't want to see them go away. But as far as the first two treatments about cutting the weeds down, I have no problem with that because they're just going to grow back and be the same way in a certain amount of years. The gentleman could not tell me how long it was going to take once they hand sprayed the particular variety that they had designated that they were going to spray, how long that was going to keep those particular varieties down. And I don't know if he knew or he just wouldn't tell me or whatever. But, you know, that's really the end of my spiel. I looked this over and I studied it because I just wanted to be more in knowledge, and I wanted to know what areas were going to have what particular removal taken care of. And I have it, and I have it, you know, pretty much summarized. Thank you very, very much for your input, and because that's what it's all about, is your input up to us, and then for us to make our decision on what way we think it should go as your community leaders.
Larry, did they have acreages in that?
They have any what?
Did they qualify it by acres?
No, they did not. You would have to figure it out because there's just sections in here that have absolutely nothing, and there's sections in here that are very heavily marked, like this one here. And but very few of them have the spray compared to just cutting them down. And I will pass that down and let everybody look at them. You know, I just wanted the information.
Could we get copies of that?
Thank you.
For point of clarification, it's 200 acres of Himalayan blackberry bushes.
Thank you.
It could be. Nobody told me.
I would like to make a motion for further discussion. I would like to move that we approve the resolution of the City of Willits opposing the use of pesticides in the valley, the Lake Valley mitigation areas. I will just clarify that the resolution doesn't say anything about cutting weeds down and things like that. So going to your point,
It doesn't prohibit that.
right? It doesn't voice our opposition to other methods. I don't know if there's a second.
I'll second that.
Yeah, I was just talking to a neighbor this morning about the supervisor's vote yesterday, and we were discussing the filling of a room by constituents, making one point or another, and that I was saying that that doesn't necessarily mean that a measure will be approved, you know, despite the fact that there's a bunch of people in the room to vote for something. And my friend was saying, well, it actually kind of assures that it won't pass if you have the room packed. And I think the point that he was trying to make is that often in this sort of forum, people who care about one issue or another inform themselves and come to speak, and it may be a group of people that you don't usually agree with, or you know, that you're on different sides of the fence on, and so you might make decisions based on other interactions you've had with people. And I just hope that we as a council, despite the fact that every person has spoken in favor of the resolution, you know, I like to think that we make up our own minds, and I have the utmost respect of my fellow council members because of that. Separate from this issue, I did have a constituent bring up concerns specifically about Roundup and glyphosate. I think it must have been around the time of the New York Times article. She was coming to me saying if the city could bring something forward in regards to our parks and, you know, the methods that we use for weed abatement. And I read the Times article and I read some related literature, and it's incredibly concerning, to say the least. And when I think about my support of this resolution, what I'm really thinking about is our neighbors in the valley, you know, the Fords, Anna and Gilbert Cox. There's a lot of Fords actually that live out there. The city's wells. If I think about having, you know, a gardener use this approved list in my backyard or my family's backyard, that would give me some serious concerns because of some of the ones that are on there. And it wasn't just Roundup, but there was a number of other ones that I have done a fair amount of reading on the rodenticides as well, and the second kill problems. That's been a huge issue affecting additional wildlife, so not just our people. But I would just rather, I think by supporting this, I feel like I'm supporting our community and our neighbors' health.
Yeah, Ron.
Well, I think it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, that no matter how any of us may stand on this particular issue, I think it's obvious that none of us would be interested in poisoning the environment or causing any harm. The whole thing comes down to what is true and what would actually happen. Now, somebody mentioned the cautionary principle, and I was informed just recently that it's actually the precautionary principle, according to WikiLeaks or whatever, just for that. And that makes some amount of sense, that if you don't understand the consequences of something, then you probably shouldn't do it. Weighed against that, though, are some of the points that Dave Watts pointed out, is that, you know, modern science is not all bad, it's not all evil, and it's not all going to kill us. Actually, some of it keeps us alive. So I always get a little nervous about throwing a blanket condemnation over something that, you know, what do they say? You kill everybody and let God sort out the good people or something. You know, I don't think that's a good philosophy either. So you have to, you know, you have to kind of dig down and find out what is actually going to happen. The problem with being an elected official and having the authority to actually vote on things and make it so is that sometimes our emotions need to take a back seat. And we have to take a hard look at something that we may or may not, in our gut, want to support. But the fact that, you don't want to, well, I'm using all kinds of bad metaphors, throw the baby out with the bathwater, sort of thing. I did ask for some clarification, and I got some. I got some good information from some of the speakers about, trusting. I know about DDT. I grew up with that stuff. All that. So I'm aware that what's good today may not be good tomorrow. And they're always learning about new things. I think Agent Orange is probably the classic example from our generation. But I do have a question. My understanding is that the whole project was designed primarily to eradicate the Himalayan blackberries. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Just nod. So I guess my question is, what is so terrible about the blackberries that they have to be eradicated? I'm not, I'm a city boy. I don't know too much about this sort of thing there, but I understand that if...
I think it's the Himalaya part.
Well, it could be. It is my understanding that if you put a flock of goats or herd or whatever they're called into a field, they'll eat these things. Duh. My other understanding of what is going on is that despite what was in the EIR, and I'm sorry, I have to believe in something, and I believe that when Caltrans wrote the EIR with their intention that they would not use pesticides or any other sides, that they intended to do that. But I also understand that the Corps of Engineers or somebody has been kind of pushing the timetable forward, which is forcing them to go away from their mechanical removal plan. This is what I hear. And as I mentioned earlier in my opening statements, what one hears isn't necessarily what is the truth. But we're all hearing different things, and I don't know which one I should hang my hat on. So, but I guess I come back to what's wrong with blackberries.
They'll overgrow the overpass in time. I mean, seriously.
Well, I can guarantee you, having...
And they're really hard to get rid of.
Yeah, I haven't lived, I've only been a resident in Willits for 17 and a half years, and I call this my home. But since I've lived here, I learned about blackberries. And one thing I learned is if you leave them alone, they're going to be picked to death by all the blackberry pickers.
The Himalayan blackberry was introduced by Luther Burbank, brought it over from Europe because it was a large berry and it escaped. It's so good and impressive.
Yeah.
One plant can cover 6 square yards, but it's a wonderful habitat for quail, birds, any number of other species. So it actually has a good place, and it's not adverse to a wet, climate. It's it's good.
In my former house, I had blackberries. It was down the street from you, actually, and I decided instead of fighting them, I was going to corral them.
Yeah.
So I put up a fence, and I trained every one of those suckers to climb the fence. And I would go out there every morning for breakfast. And the ones that left the fence and started to creep towards the house, I gave them fair warning. And if they didn't retreat, they died.
All right.
But anyway, I could support this resolution, except that you use the term advisory, and I hate making a stand on something that's not going to make a difference. All right.
Excuse me, got to give Ron his due here.
Give Ron his due. Anyway, I don't know if maybe it could be rewritten a little more specific or less specific, or maybe ask the basic question, why do we have to get rid of the blackberries?
May I add one?
No, I think we've got all the information we need up here.
Erosion. Removal of the blackberries will cause erosion and sedimentation of the stream.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I would like to say that I don't believe that we can rewrite the MMPs, even though we might like to, but that's been a long process that's been negotiated and hashed out between the federal and state agencies and Caltrans. There are some things about it that I think are egregious and horrible, and it could be that one of them is that we don't need to eradicate the blackberries at all. But the point of this project, that is the mitigation contract that Caltrans is awarding very soon, by the way, is not to use herbicides to eradicate blackberries. It's to enhance the wetlands and to create wetlands where they don't exist. And so, in my view, using herbicides to enhance a wetland is an oxymoron, if I ever heard one. If they need to get rid of the blackberries in order to have healthy wetlands, do some other way of doing it, but don't poison the wetland, for goodness sake. So that's really kind of fundamental to my thinking about why this is important, because the project isn't to eradicate blackberries. The project is to enhance the wetland. Just so happens almost all the blackberries are right along the creeks. So it is going to definitely affect the creeks. They also, my information that was from Phil Frisbee was that they would be doing this for 3 consecutive summers. Repeated applications every summer for 3 summers. So it isn't just a one-shot deal. It's an ongoing, and I've also heard from landowners in our valley who have used Roundup that it does accumulate and it does stay in the soil, notwithstanding their claims that it doesn't. It just dissipates and goes away. It doesn't. People who've done it experience that and they know that. So it just is against common sense. If we care about our creeks and we care about our wetlands and we care about our valley residents and we care about the Native Americans who are going to go in there and gather reeds for their baskets, if we care about any of those things, and the ranchers who also depend on the water and their livestock that might be grazing on that, it is not necessary to use herbicides to manage a wetland. It is counterproductive to do so. So, and as I said, we can't go back and tell the Water Board and the Corps of Engineers to rewrite their MMPs, much as I'd like to. But we can at least say Caltrans had committed for a long time not to use herbicides. We want them to stand by that commitment, and we think we represent the city and the surrounding area, that it is in our well-being and our interests to do so. And I think that would have not just it's not just a token statement. It could very well change their mind, because they do care about elected officials and how we stand and the communities. But I think it's necessary for us to say that for them to hear it.
Larry? In looking at the map, there isn't anything that the city owns that is going to be sprayed. And so I'm just saying that as far as our jurisdiction goes, there isn't anything that's going to be sprayed from their particular map, but there is some of the valley that's going to be sprayed, obviously. So, but I just wanted to make that known.
And it is 67 acres, which is the largest area. I mean, someone using it in their backyard is a tiny thing. 67 acres is a lot of acres.
I would like to see if we can make a slight change to the resolution. As I mentioned before, I don't see the value of doing resolutions that aren't going to do anything except, having us beat our impotent fist against the fence. I think we need to get to the core of the issue, I mean, why is this being done in the first place? So I would like to see in the resolution some reference to, number one, why are the blackberries being eradicated in the first place? Justify that. The second one is, if what I had said before is true about Caltrans being pressured by somebody to accelerate the eradication, then I think we should put something in the resolution about why is that important. In other words, attack the core of the issue. To just blanket and say no pesticides, that's okay, but it's kind of impotent, I think, because unless we can come up with an alternative. And that's the thing about being, public official. It doesn't work for us to sit up here and say, don't do this, because something has to be done. And the unanswered question is, well, what is that something supposed to be? It's easy to say stop, but it's a little more difficult to say stop, but do such and such. And I'm suggesting that we need to go beyond the stop and put something in this resolution that asks questions that can resolve the core issue here.
So I'm not interested in amending my motion primarily because the Himalayan blackberry is invasive. That's why I'm sure their biologists have told them that that's why it needs to be removed. I don't think we're gonna have much sway on their desire to remove an invasive species as part of their wetlands plan.
Well, let me, before you go off at that point, so we're going to listen to the biologists that said we need to get rid of the blackberries, but we're not going to listen to a chemist or a scientist who says if we spray the blackberries with this chemical, it's safe. There is a contradiction here. Do we believe the authorities or not?
You're not spraying, excuse me, you're not spraying the blackberries, you're spraying the ground that they're on. That's what you're spraying. They're gonna cut all of the blackberries down to the ground. And then they're gonna spray on top of the vine that's sticking up, or whatever. I mean, they're not just gonna go and canvas and spray all the blackberries. I mean, you can look at the map and see what it says.
Well, they're gonna mechanically treat it, and then they're going to spray the mechanically treated
That
plant.
is correct.
And as a side note,
But
if
it's
someone
still
could come
gonna
up,
be spraying, but I'm just saying that they're not just gonna be blanketing all of the blackberries.
and if
That's
someone
not
could
gonna
come up with a building material made of blackberry canes, they'd be a millionaire. And secondly, I think this is purely advisory, but it is still with merit for us to pass it. We do not have the authority to put more
Emphasis.
to put punitive actions in there. It's the city limits. The city of Willits limits are. That is where our authority lies, and we can be advisory in really what is our community. I mean, the valley is our community.
What about trespass?
Ready for a vote?
Well, I think we've just about wrapped this up. My only comments are that, if we wanted to talk about whether the mitigation plan is a worthwhile endeavor for this project, I think I'd be glad to participate in that. I'd rather they gave us our $50 million back and the land back and just built their freeway and went home. I don't think that this is any of this is a really good expenditure of public funds. I don't think that. It's all right, it's not very interesting anyway. So I think there are beneficial uses of chemicals, and there's beneficial uses to using them, and I think there's necessary places to use them. And I don't know that I've heard anything here that really convinces me that in all cases and in all all places that's true and not true. And so, and I don't know enough information here to pass. And, you know, I just resist passing a negative judgment unless I am overwhelmed by evidence. And I think that I've tried to get rid of blackberries for years myself, and you know, I think Ron's point's really well. I mean, I don't care whether they get rid of the blackberries or not. They can leave them there. It doesn't make any difference to me. It really doesn't. But really, the public spoke when they said they demanded mitigation for projects, whether it's a freeway project or a subdivision or you know, anything that qualifies a project has to have mitigation, and I think that they're trying to do it in a way that's responsible to the regulators that are regulating them in the time frames that they've been allowed to work on. I think they're working against parameters that not entirely clear here to me. So anyway, are we ready to vote?
Just a very short addition, and that is that if the Corps of Engineers' time pressure is what is forcing, quote unquote, Caltrans to propose using herbicides, this resolution would also go to them, and I'm sure that many citizens here would love to lobby the Corps of Engineers to give them enough time so they don't have to use poison.
Yes. Could be. We done?
Mm-hmm.
Roll call vote, please.
Yes. Councilmember Stransky.
Yes.
Strong.
Yes.
Vanderbilt.
Yes.
Ornstein.
This is the nice thing about voting for something that probably won't change anything, so I can vote yes to support the public. And knowing that, you know, it's not going to change the world, so I'll vote yes.
No. Passes 4-1. Thank you for joining us this evening. You're welcome to stay. We'll give you a couple minutes. In fact, I'm going to take a 5 or 10 reconvene the council meeting, and we're going to move on to the update on the city's emergency water supply project. Rod, spraying any blackberries today?
We don't have any there. No, we won't. Not much has changed. We haven't been able to do a whole lot of work on it. We're going to start working on it tomorrow. We have some leads on the new well driller. Our well driller decided he didn't want to put us on his schedule this year and just didn't want to do the work. So we just found that out a couple weeks ago. Kind of leaves us in a bad spot, and he hasn't given us much explanation other than he's busy, and this is not. This one isn't one he wants to do. So. Yeah, that's about it. I mean, we haven't made much progress because we've been working on other things in the last couple of weeks. So.
Okay, well, I don't want to change the subject on it. I'm sure we'll get to it in another part of your report. Okay.
Yeah. I have been trying to run down alternative funding sources for the emergency water project, and spent some time today on the EPA's website and the safe drinking water quality, because there's funds available there, but it's like very challenging to find out what we actually need to apply for, when to do that, and things like that. But I am working on it.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Consent calendar. We're just, I think, looking at the minutes of, well, items A, the goal-setting workshop, and financial statements, and
I'll move approval of the goal-setting minutes, the financial statements, and the Frontier Days parade route.
Second.
I had, okay, I'll deal with my questions. Motion and I heard a second. Any
Yeah.
public comment on those items? Roll call vote, please.
Yes. Councilmember Stransky?
Yes.
Strong?
Yes.
Vanderhold?
Yes.
Ornstein?
Yes.
Mayor Burton?
Yes. Right to appeal. Persons are dissatisfied with the decision, the city council may have a right to review of that decision by court. The city's adopted 1094.6 of the Code of Civil Procedure, which generally limits to 90 days, time within which the decisions of boards and agencies may be judicially challenged. Any verbal reports from the city manager?
Yes.
Good.
Let's see, we have been, since the last council meeting on April 8th, when you guys gave the green light for staff to pursue the ATP grant application for Rails with Trails project. We've met again with MCOG last week, and then yesterday with Kathy Hopper, who is a grant writer. She wrote the grant for us for the Sustainable Communities grant that we were awarded, and so she's helping us again with this one. And frankly, it's the, break or make component of this, because it's a big application, it's complex, and it is requiring a lot of staff time, but Kathy's going to weave it all together for us. So we met with her yesterday to really go down the list about who is going to do what, by when, and what format, and so on and so forth. The grant application, just to remind you, is due June 1st. We're aiming to submit that, and that's a Monday. We're aiming to submit it by midweek, the prior week. So we've done some outreaches to get some other assistance with the project, with the application. For example, Tina Tyler O'Shea is someone that's come to council meetings previously with her group of Achieve kids. And I reached out to her to ask if she would, if they would be willing to do the bike and pedestrian counts for us as part of this grant application. And I met with her, I don't remember if it was yesterday now or Monday, to go over the specifics of that. And she's excited about that. She thinks the kids will be excited about that as well. So it's nice to engage the community in this.
They can put it on their resumes.
That's right,
They
yeah.
have to do that.
We're preparing for the budget workshop, which is scheduled for May 21st. That's a Thursday. That's the typical day in May, in between council meetings, that we have done the full council budget workshop. Last year, we did not hold the Finance Committee review, which is usually the first week in May, and again, this year, we're proposing to bypass that in this, just to keep our efforts focused. And so we are aiming to have the budgets to you 2 weeks before the budget workshop, so there's ample time to review it and formulate your questions and be prepared for that workshop. We are proposing a full-day workshop, not just in the afternoon, because that's our only stab at it.
You don't have the time set there yet?
Not yet. We'll get back
We
to you.
start at 6 a.m.
We're also preparing for labor negotiations. That process is not kicked off yet, and in large part because we haven't done the budget review for the coming year. We're also preparing for the summer pool season, so I reached out to last year's manager and assistant pool manager and heard back from one of them, so it looks like we'll have some returning staff there. Let's see, Monday there was a ruling on tiered water rates, that a suit that was brought forth by residents. Oh, there you go.
Clearly, Bruce and I both
Yes.
noticed that.
And this was in San Juan Capistrano. I think it was initiated in March, the lawsuit, and it was ruled on Monday. And the ruling was in favor of the residents that brought it forward. And so we're looking at that as our every other jurisdiction to see what we may need to do to restructure our rates.
Seems like you almost have to have the highest rates for the initial use and the lower rates for people that use more. Because if people stop using water, then all your fixed costs are in the first 1 million gallons or so.
Well, the question is that I'm hoping that the state is planning, or that somebody is going to appeal that to the state.
I'd be surprised if that doesn't happen, if
Yeah,
there's
so-
not a petition to publish the decision or to seek review.
So as soon as an appeal is filed, then that decision doesn't take effect yet?
That's right, it wouldn't be a final decision until the appeal process
Yeah,
is.
so I would urge us not to, in panic, go and start rewriting our entire
And we're
water
not.
rates until we have to.
Absolutely.
We're just keeping an eye on it at this point.
Yeah.
And for example, the League of California Cities hasn't weighed in yet, and all of that will happen, so. Let's see, we're still looking for a library advisory board rep to represent the city. We're still exploring our technology needs as we roll towards the budget process. We're just preparing for, we have a number of upgrades and improvements to do to our technology system, and so staff has been working on that. And Bruce might want to say something about this. A week or two ago, we hosted mayors and city managers
Right.
and county board chair and CEO here in Willits.
I'll say something about
Okay.
that under council member reports.
Okay. Then on upcoming agendas at the next meeting on May 13th, we will be holding a public hearing regarding the financing package on the medical office building. The foundation, Howard Foundation, approached the city about serving as a conduit on financing so they could get more favorable financing terms. And so staff has been working with the financial institutions to move that forward, and you'll see a notice in next Wednesday's Willits News, we haven't sent it to you yet, for that public hearing. It has to be published 14 days prior to the hearing. So at that meeting, we will hold the public hearing, and then the council will be asked to consider approving that request.
I learned today that they're planning to start construction in about 2 or 3 weeks. Is that contingent upon this action?
Yes, it is. Well, I've heard that they actually have the money, so.
Okay. They just want to
Right.
refinance.
Right. That's my report for tonight.
Okay. We shall move along to department recommendations. Anything from the city clerk?
Yes. I would like to thank each and every one of you for the beautiful flowers that I received today. That was very sweet and I was very touched. Thank you.
Thanks for bringing them so we could enjoy them.
Anything from finance?
Just a little.
Sure.
I know we already did on consent the audit, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the management report that was included with the audit.
Right. I was going to talk to you about that.
Because
Go ahead.
the management report, it states things that the auditor found that he thinks needs to be corrected or that he at least wants to notify the council of. And the first thing was that not all invoices were being signed by department heads. And I want to clarify that all invoices were being signed, maybe not by a director. So we kind of have to either rewrite our policy to state who can sign off on certain invoices, or we have to have the director sign off on every invoice, which is what we have been doing for the last.
Yeah, we didn't have directors for a certain amount of time. so-
Yeah, and so people got used to doing it,
Right.
and yeah, it's just something that happened. The last year, or prior year's observations, the GASB 54 formal statement, we're currently in the process of creating that as we speak. Bill Statler's helping us with that, so that should be completed, within the next month, I'll say.
I think the plan on that was to bring that forward at the budget workshop.
Okay, perfect. The second thing, that the city finance committee wasn't doing periodic meetings and looking at the financial statements, and we have been doing that since I started. Pool cash collections, this is something that
Say every time.
I don't know how we're gonna get all this detail from every single person that walks through there, but we'll work on it and see what we can come up with that will satisfy the auditor. The fourth thing, the written accounting, administrative, and fraud procedures manual. That's just something that we're gonna have to work on this year, and I have it on a list of things to do. The non-recurring journal entries and bank reconciliation review, they were always being looked at but not signed off on. They're currently being signed off on, and I'm signing off on journal entries that I'm not preparing. Senior accountant is signing off on journal entries that I'm preparing, and Adrian is signing off on all the bank recs.
Okay,
Okay?
great. Can you answer a question for me
I'll try.
or do you have the document with you?
I do.
It's on page 9, on management's discussion and analysis.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to confirm what I think is the case. Halfway down the page, are you on that page? Mm-hmm. It's proprietary funds, and it's this, first in the sewer fund, it says the change in the net position of the sewer fund results in a decrease of $648,000. And then with an increased operating revenues of $235,000. Is it reasonable to say that was a lot of attorney's fees in that $648,000?
Yes, that would be a reasonable assumption to make.
That's what I was afraid of.
Yes.
And then the next fund below it, where we reduced our our operating expenses increased by $1.346 million from, is that reasonable to assume that is a big part of the emergency water project?
Absolutely. Yes.
That's kind of what I was afraid was the case. Well, I guess I was hoping it was the case in a way, and I'm kind of afraid it was. Thank you. Human resources and legal, anything in the legal?
No, I was going to comment on that San Juan catastrophic case, but Andrew beat me to it.
Okay.
I have a quick question for legal. I had this note to see if we could get a total legal costs. I know the Brook Trails lawsuit is behind us, but I would like, unless you think that this thing in the is the total amount, I would like to see what that would be, what the attorney's costs.
I'm sure that.
I think that's more of a question for Susie.
Okay. I would like at some point to get a total cost of litigation for the entire lawsuit, ideally. Okay. And I have another, this is a Jim question. I would love to, some later date, hear your thoughts on this ruling, because I downloaded the ruling and I felt sort of vindicated. You know, it says that the trial court erred in holding that 218 does not allow public water agencies to have tiered rates. But then it goes on to say that they do have to show that they are charging for service accurately. But, I mean, apparently that's not what the reporters say. But I sort of, reading the finding, I sort of thought like, oh, okay, we're doing it all right.
Yeah, they said a lot of things. It's a long, complicated opinion that I haven't fully read myself yet. But the tiered rates, the cost for providing the service has to be reflected in the rate. And if you're going to have a tiered rate, then for each of those tiers, there has to be some evidence in the record that that tier is necessary for providing the service to that rate, to that tier, and that wasn't done. The city of San Juan Capistrano didn't have that kind of record to support its tiering.
Okay.
And I think something like 2/3 of all water agencies in the state of California are using a tiered system, including Willits. And so we may need to go back to the drawing board as well.
On that point, if a case could be made that citywide, not, resident by resident, but citywide, if we overuse the water resources that we have developed, the infrastructure, that kicks in a humongous expense, and therefore it is justified to reduce, to have conservation and charge more for higher usage, because you want to avoid that cost. Could that argument be made if we need to do it that way?
I think it's your best one.
I think so. The other issue that they talked about in that case was alternative water sources and using like recycled water and incurring big expenses for developing other sources of water. And how should that be paid for? And what about persons who are real water misers, who don't use very much water, and it's not their usage that's kicking in these other alternative water sources. Anyway, there's a lot to absorb and to. I'll report back to you as we learn more.
It'll be interesting.
Chief.
I'll make it brief.
You always have to, you take all the time you want tonight.
There you go.
We're always asking you to make it brief.
Yeah, well, maybe next time I'll bring my Himalayan goat in. I was telling these lots, I'm going to get a Himalayan goat to eat those Himalayan blackberries. But our 911 project, our other partners, the Sheriff's Department and the Ukiah Police Department, they've installed their 911 devices, and everybody seems to be running at this point, and we're fine-tuning it. There's still a couple of things in our little remodel thing there that, or furniture move, I'll call it better. It wasn't really a remodel, that we're still trying to get up and running. On our COPS grant, it was a 3-year grant, and it technically was going to come to an end in May, but we didn't hire an individual for over a year, so we had to apply for an extension, and we were granted an extension on our grant. So they actually make it pretty easy, but you have to apply, and they granted it for us. So that continues. We're still on the same grant. It's still the same 3 years. It's just that I guess they put it in a certain time period, and we weren't fitting that in that box, so now we are good with them. Another thing I wanted to comment on, countywide, we've experienced a lot of stolen vehicles. And, either they're stolen from somewhere else and dropped off here, or I think we just lost one the other day. I don't want to get into the circumstances, but most of the time it's somebody's just leaving their car unlocked, sometimes with the keys in it. And I guess as by way of public service announcement, please keep your cars locked, keep your keys out of them, and don't leave valuables out where people can see that they're there, laptops, those sort of things. Just entice people to want to break into your vehicle. And I'll just leave it at that, but there is a lot. And one of the things, I guess by virtue of the changes in the law, the penalties for those things aren't what they used to be. And that was one of those things in the shift in the changes in the law that, while some folks felt it was for certain reasons, I think the legislature might be revisiting that. I think it's made it a little less risky for folks to do those things. So why help them by leaving your keys in your car, leaving your car running, and those sort of things? I just kind of put it out there, please. We can't take care of everybody. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Chief. Water and wastewater systems.
Starting with water, the reservoirs are at 1,198 acre feet.
as compared to last year, we were at 1241, I believe, 1240. So we're down a little bit as compared to last year, but we've been holding pretty steady. Obviously, it'd be nice to get some April showers.
We will.
A little bit of May rain. The last rain just didn't quite give us enough, but anyway. The water department, working with the sewer and the public works department, fixed a leak on Bit and Bender. We still have another leak up there, and we have an 8-inch line that's servicing 2 units. That's very deep and hard to deal with, so we're going to, rather than fix the other leak, we're going to replace it with a 1-inch 1-inch line that'll satisfy both
Is that what
services.
used to come out of the tank up there then?
I think so, yeah. So I haven't been up to see it. I've just been getting the reports. We're almost finished with Main Street Waterline Phase 2. They sent the tests in today, the back T test, so once they come back as clear, we'll be able to connect it and backfill that last little spot at the corner of the state and Main there. And we have a little spot on the other side we have to backfill, but overall I think that turned out to be a very good project. Very challenging project for those guys, I believe, dealing with Main Street and traffic, and they worked a lot of hours and volunteered to, just so everybody knows, it was their idea to work at night. It was not a Caltrans requirement. They chose to work at night because of the traffic. We stopped a little bit short of a valve we want to fix at State Street because we're going to wait till school's out, because we're going to have to shut off water a little bit to fix that valve and do the last 20 or 30 feet of pipe between where we stopped. We're tied into PVC right there at the corner, but we've essentially gotten rid of all of the old wrapped steel line on Main Street. I was told there may be a little bit down by Brown's Corner, but I sent Adrian some pictures of the pipe. Counted 23 clamps on half the block that we got. And they might have taken some off too. Looked like there were some spots.
You guys are fudging with the numbers.
Yeah. But we only took out half the block, so the south half is still in there. The total cost were, as of yesterday, is about a little under $33,000. We expect to finish for less than $35,000, for half a day.
That to be big time commended for that. That's a huge
Those guys were,
accomplishment for those guys. And
that's
benefit
probably,
to the city.
if I were to estimate what we would pay a contractor to do the work, it's less than half of what we would pay a contractor to do the work, and we had $160,000 in the capital improvement in the budget for Phase 2. So we'll be able to do it for,
We're gonna, might just have to keep tromping on your way up Main Street with that.
Thank everybody that worked hard at night and whatever. Tell them that we appreciate their effort. And how big a line is that?
It's 12-inch ductile
12 -inch,
iron.
okay, thank you.
So we replaced 10-inch with 12-inch, and it was Sean Payne, Logan Gamble, and Darren from the Public Works Department, and Pete Peterson from the Sewer Department out there at night. So.
And I pass this on to Rod and Adrian, but I did get a independent thank you and congratulations from out in the community, and we don't hear that enough. And they really appreciated that the guys were out there at night, and they really thought that they were doing a good job, and
I wish we
maybe
were
even brought them some muffins or something.
So,
Rod, I became aware last week, I went out to visit the sewer plant, and JC showed me a problem that regarding the bypass as it cuts over the ponds. Are you aware of that situation?
Yeah, it cuts over the cuts
close.
over the ponds. I mean, it's right there.
What his concern is something I was not aware of, is that he was concerned about things falling off into the pond and getting the liner ripped up or hitting one of the workers. And I asked him if he had talked to Caltrans about it, and he said, yeah, but, you know, he's getting where he's getting. And I asked him if he felt that it would help if the city got involved with having them put up some kind of a barricade up there, is what he suggested, to keep things from falling over.
They taught, okay, the first conversation I had with Caltrans happened to be right out there where they're building right now in May of 2014, last year. And they were made aware of the concerns, and they said they would do everything they possibly could to keep tools from falling in our aeration basins. And it would take quite a bit to do significant damage. I think as long as we communicate with our people and their people, and when they're doing work in that specific area right on the corner, and we're just safety-minded, I think, I'm hoping that we'll be able to avoid any mishaps. But I'm not sure how we can construct something to completely shield our I mean, it's a construction area.
Well, but in any construction area, I mean, if you have a high-rise building, I used to work in a shipyard, and, you know, you have things falling down all the time.
Right.
They could put up a temporary net underneath the work area, so if anything falls down, it's caught in the net. That's not hard to do. But it's after the construction is completed that JC seemed to be concerned about. If you have an accident up there, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, he told me that in the wintertime, the hot water that's in the pond will make steam and it'll make fog up on the roadway. And that fog will freeze. So they're creating a situation where you could have an icy roadway right there where it bends, causing accidents, and accidents can cause maybe vehicles falling over, maybe hubcaps flying out, maybe tires, you know, all kinds of debris from the traffic that could fall into the pond, hit somebody below, or ruin the pond. So there's all these things that if they put up a permanent barrier, you know, a fence kind of a thing just over that area, that would keep anything from falling over. And it seems to me that that's a reasonable concern, and you know, if we need to take the full power of the city and make something happen there.
So you're talking about something permanent, not during construction.
Well, temporary.
Well, I've heard both. You know,
Yeah, well,
we're
both.
concerned
Yeah,
during
you need a
construction.
temporary for now for construction, and definitely something permanent.
Like a baseball dugout is what you're talking about. Like a baseball dugout, I mean, that's what they have.
Well, yeah, or any, you know, you go to a lot of the bridges down in the Bay Area, and they all have barricades of some kind over an overpass, you know, that falls down onto the highway below. Keeps kids from throwing things over, that kind of stuff. So I think it's a real potential problem that we need to get on Caltrans about. They need to do something for us.
Well, I think we'll have some staff discussion about that and see if what we can find out.
That would be the change order we'd be asking them to make during construction. So,
well,
I mean, that's the reality. That's what we'd be asking them to.
Life's a bitch.
Change. So
you move on.
In the meantime, we're anxious for them to finish.
Oh yeah,
and and move.
No, I get
move
that,
along.
but we're going to have to live with this thing afterwards.
Right.
And if there is a real danger that traffic can cause things to fall in or down or on top of your workers, then that needs to be resolved.
Yeah. Statistically, you know, I know you're a statistics guy. The one 20-foot section of the highway there, I mean, we can ask them to, if they're willing to make some modifications to ensure, for safety reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Well, we can considerably look into it.
Right.
Thank you. You got anything else for us?
I think that's
okay.
And then make sure to thank the guys.
Yeah.
So let's move to council and committee reports. MCOG,
Did not meet.
LAFCO,
Did not meet.
MTA,
They will be meeting tomorrow.
MSWA,
Hasn't met.
EDFC.
I was wrong 2 weeks ago. I went there and there was no meeting, so it will be next month.
I hate it when that happens.
I know.
League of California Cities,
Did not meet.
Water and Wastewater Systems Committee did not. Revite Ed,
Did not meet.
it says not met. I don't think anything on, Main Street Improvement Group did meet.
Mhm.
It just,
Refresh my memory.
Yeah.
It was in here.
it was in here.
I came in
think it
just
was
for a
right.
minute, and didn't say
I think
anything.
it was
A week or two
mostly-
ago.
It was
Yeah, it was
mostly filling in on the status of the grant applications and what
Yeah.
was going on with that.
And I had mentioned to Adrian that I have been asked in the community about the timeline for the downtown planning grant. And I think you guys addressed that, right? What you're
Yes.
trying to, share that with the public?
So the Sustainable Communities Grant application that we were notified last month that we were awarded, and I think this month we're supposed to receive official notification and funds available starting July 1st. That grant, if I recall, is a 17-month grant. And one of the things I think is of interest to the community is the multi-day charrette for the community that we're going to be conducting. In the grant application, it schedules that to occur in February. We are going to be looking to move that up to this fall so that we can hopefully expedite this entire process, since so much of the conceptual work was already done when we submitted the grant application. And so anyway, we'll keep you posted on that.
Anything on the solar array?
We're getting ready to see our final proposal, but we're going to have an ad hoc meeting on Friday to discuss another issue that came up.
Center for the Arts, Adrian and I met just the other day with some interested arts center patrons, I guess you'd call
Members.
them, members. So we are trying to come up with a proposal for the city. They are trying to come up with a proposal for the city. Any other committee reports we're missing? So council member reports and recommendations. As Adrian mentioned, several months ago, I asked Adrian if they still carried on with the earlier program of having the city's mayors and managers meet once or twice, or 2 or 3 times a year to just discuss items of mutual interest, and I guess that had kind of gone by the wayside. So we reinitiated it, and last week we had everybody here in Willits for a lunch meeting. It was Carmel Angelo and Carrie Brown and Doug Crane and Jane Chambers and Linda Roofing and Dave Turner, and I'm going to struggle, Bill.
James Kugel and Phil Vance.
Oh, thank you, from Point Arena.
Ah.
And not a specific agenda, but just a chance to get together and discuss things of mutual interest and concern. And I find it, I think that everybody found it rewarding, and it was a nice informal atmosphere to just kind of, compare notes on water issues, compare notes on things with some of the social services. The homeless issue was, and some of the work the county's trying to do on that. It's just, just an informative thing. But I think there would seem to be enough enthusiasm. Fort Bragg's going to host the next one probably in the early fall. So that, I think was a success, so. That's my, any other council member reports or recommendations?
Yeah, it's funny that we all came up with a tiered water rate thing. But also you had mentioned maybe making a sphere of influence committee. Are you gonna be thinking about that?
Yeah, I'll sit down with staff and or city manager, and we'll kind of map out what the process is gonna be on that. I'm all for creating one if we can disband one. No net gain. Any good and welfare?
Yeah, I feel very blessed living so close to the new hospital. I get to see all the new progress going on. It's really shaping up nicely. The landscaping is really cool. This afternoon, I noticed that there's a new bus shelter on the side, you know, where we had approved the bus stop. And it's not a typical MTA bus shelter. This is like Victorian looking. It's beautiful. And then over by the entrance to the hospital, they have a topiary garden with some swirly bushes and all kinds of things. And there's a flower bed with all kinds of bright flowers. And when I first looked at it, it reminded me of a racetrack. And I was speaking to Margie Hanley today, and she said, yeah, that's supposed to be a replica of the Santa Anita racetrack. Because right in that area is where the statue of Seabiscuit is going to go, with Frank Howard and Raymond Babcock. And they already have the foundation poured for that. So, I mean, it's shaping up to be a really cool facility. I'm proud of that. Yeah, I love it.
Did they have a test landing of the helicopter there the other day?
As far as I'm aware, they haven't landed there yet.
Oh, okay. I would have swore I saw the helicopter land out there.
Yeah,
well, I would swear.
There was, yeah.
It was beyond, it sure looked to me like it was beyond.
Yeah.
That's all right, I'm just curious.
Margie's nephew.
Yes, no, it was the reach out.
Right before this, actually, and I thought Ron was gonna mention this, I was able to attend the Community Foundation's grant award for their community enrichment grants that they had done this year.
Just for this region?
Yes.
Yep,
They
Willits
do
in the
another
north
one.
area.
Ron and I are both involved with the organization, but it's really a great group that distributes money to local groups in need. And so some of the ones for our area was that the Seabiscuit Foundation and Golden Rule got money to restore the carriage house doors in the carriage house so that they'll be able to have events down there. What were some of the other ones? Yes, the Howard Foundation and Doreen Blumenfeld are involved in training facilitators for healthcare and wellness.
Is that the Avenues to Wellness?
The Avenues, yeah, but it's the like truck training facilitators for that. The Arts Commission also received one. Laytonville received one, and a animal group in Covelo that is helping with cats. It's just it's neat to go to these events where the basically primarily volunteer organizations in our area are getting a boost.
It was $120,000 this year that was given out.
Madge?
Yeah. This Saturday at 4 o'clock, there's going to be a forum held at the Grange regarding supersizing or downsizing the bypass. So there are still issues being discussed and education of what those issues are, including Native American cultural sites and mitigation plans. And we just feel that a lot of the public don't necessarily have all the information about that, and there's open discussion, as well as some presentations. And the one other thing that my other life, my other hat, and my music career, I wanted to mention that Emmendale Chorale is going to be celebrating its 20th anniversary with a concert on May 16th. So it should be really a special time.
Where's it going to be held?
It's going to be at the Little Lake Grange, and tickets are available at Mazahar and I think a couple of other places. So it should be really nice for those who like choral music, and it's very exciting stuff. I enjoy being part of it.
Great, thank you. Closed session. We got 3 items in closed session tonight. Conference with legal counsel, people of the state of California, City of Willits versus Remco Hydraulics, and conference on labor negotiators pursuant to employee organizations, and performance evaluation city manager. I'm going to declare a conflict of interest possibly on item A, so I won't be participating in item A this evening. So, anything is, any...
Do you want to reverse them?
Yeah. Have that one up for last.
No, he has to leave and then come back again at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, I think actually, thank you for that idea. That's exactly what we'll do. Okay, so we will recess to closed session. If we make any decisions, closed sessions, we will report out here immediately thereafter.